Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to Season 3 of the Logical Christian Podcast. I'm your Logical Christian, Dan Irwin. The Logical Christian Podcast is not here to tell you what to think. It's an exercise in how to think. Rather than just accept what we're being told with regard to current events, politics, science, religion, and everything else, we're going to stop the spin, ask questions, dive deep, and look at the world logically. And since logic is a gift from God, most importantly, we're going to look at it all as Christians. Links can be found in the show notes if you'd like to follow along. So with that, let's go be logical Christians. So my pastor, about a year ago, mentioned that we were going to be starting a series walking through Revelation. He said that he's noticed that the sanctuary was getting a little full, and there are two proven ways to clear out some space: preach on the doctrine of election or preach on Revelation. We all laughed, although it was a knowing laugh, because he was only sort of joking. There is no doubt that the more potential for controversy the topic has, the more likely it'll be that you lose people. That said, that in no way should dictate what you should preach. I wonder if that same thing holds true with podcasts. I guess we'll find out. On today's episode, first we'll tackle some current controversial events, then we'll delve deep into the past, and finally we'll look at a classic, all the while shedding listeners as I go. Possibly. So grab a stack of mail-in ballots, prepare to gouge out your eyes and mill some grain, and finally get the torches and pitchforks. I have a feeling you're gonna need them, because with great reluctance, trepidation, and seemingly ignorant obliviousness, oh boy, here we go.
Well, I'll tell you what. If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
That, as you probably are well aware, was said by our potato-in-chief, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., back in May of 2020 on Charlemagne the God's podcast when he was running for chief potato. Amazingly, Biden looks like a Mensa member back then as compared to today, and he looked really, really bad back then. I mean, really bad. Yet he won, or maybe we should say, yet he was declared the winner and assumed the office of president and somehow was still alive. I'll admit I honestly thought that he was going to step aside and hand the keys to Kamala within the first few months. Definitely didn't think he'd make it the full 4 years. I didn't think he'd live through the full 4 years. In fact, I think there are legitimate questions as to if he is alive right now. Most of us have seen Weekend at Bernie's. We know that there are people pulling his strings. I mean, it all kind of makes sense. Or not. I don't know. Whatever. But that was then, this is now. We no longer have to worry about old Joe. No, despite the fact that the Democrats pushed to make changes to the dates of primaries, sued to keep other candidates off the ballot, did all sorts of other things just to ensure that he got the votes he needed to become the Democrats' candidate, which he did. He then stepped aside. Some may say that there was a nonviolent insurrection or a coup. And this woman, if we can even define what that is, which we absolutely cannot, of color, which is of the utmost importance, was democratically installed without ever getting a single vote, just like all democracies, as far as you know, as the heir apparent, despite being the most despised candidate in 2020, being mocked even by the leftist media up to the point of her appointment, and being one of the most unlikable, bloodthirsty, cackling, empty suits in our history of presidential elections. A conservative recently attended a Kamala rally, which from everything I've seen isn't that difficult. I mean, plenty of space to sit, stand, land an airplane. I mean, basically her rallies are sparsely attended. Anyway, this conservative woman, Rooted.Wings on the X, happened to catch some audio from what looked to be in the hall right outside the stadium or whatever venue she was in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where someone in the crowd, after Harris said something about sacrificing babies to Molech or something like that, he shouted out, "Jesus is Lord," to which Harris literally stopped her prepared remarks, because those are really the only remarks she knows how to speak, and said, quote, "I think you're at the wrong rally. No, I think you meant to go to the smaller one down the street." Biden was being perfectly honest when he said that if you're black, you better be a Democrat. Harris was being perfectly honest when she said that if you're a Christian, you don't belong in the Democrat Party. Sometimes they slip up and they speak honestly. As we near the election, I want to tackle those two topics. Make no mistake, in the eyes of the Democrat Party, if you're black, or throw in literally any minority at this point, and you don't vote for them, you're nothing but a self-hating traitor to your race, quotes around that word, wanting to be white or liked by evil whitey, and you should be ashamed of yourself. Similarly, if you're a woman and you don't vote Democrat, it's because you're being controlled by a patriarchal society or a misogynistic man, and you need to break free from his oppressive, abusive clutches. I don't have a single base article I'll be working from in this segment. I'll be using a handful of articles to discuss these topics. Some I'll name, others I won't. Links will be in the notes. And let me say this at the offset. I actually agree with Kamala. If you're a Christian, you don't belong in the Democrat Party. If you're a Christian and vote Democrat, one of those two things isn't true. In other words, I maintain that if you vote Democrat, you aren't saved. And if you are truly saved, you must vote, and that must be a vote for the Republican. This premise may be offensive to some of you. Please hang with me. If at the end you still feel I'm wrong, contact me and tell me why. One caveat to that, I don't care how you feel. I don't care if you're offended. Bring me the facts. If you still think I'm wrong when we get to the end of the segment, bring facts for me to consider. I can give you this promise. I will give them legitimate, honest consideration. If you bring me your feelings, if you express how I'm wrong based on your opinion, I may read it, I'll likely laugh at it, and then I'll delete it. Bring facts, preferably biblically backed facts. Okay. We know where Biden, Harris, and the Democrats stand. You know where I stand. Let's go ahead and dig into this. Starting with Biden's premise. If you want to know if something is racist, switch the color, or the ethnicity, or the culture, or the gender, and say the same thing. What Biden said is basically that if you're black, you better vote Democrat. If you don't, you're no better than a white. Okay. Let's say Trump, in one of his many, many speeches, one where he hasn't been shot at yet, says, if you're white, you better vote for me. If you don't, you're no better than a black. Uncomfortable yet? You should be. So why is it okay, or at least dismissible, when said about blacks and said by a Democrat? And the answer is simple, because there's a D behind his name. With the media, that's really all it takes to be the most racist humans ever. Now keep in mind, Thomas Jefferson attempted to include in the Declaration of Independence a clause about how slavery was forced on us by the king into the colonies, and he wanted it gone. They wanted it to be gone. It was taken out as the South, who were, or at least would become Democrats, wanted to keep their slaves. That little phrase or that clause was not kept in the Declaration of Independence. Keep in mind that the Founding Fathers wrote in the 3/5 clause to the Constitution, not to demean the black man, but as a negotiation with the Southern states that those opposed to slavery hoped would one day allow for the anti-slavery people to be able to outvote the slavery-wanting people and abolish slavery through the means of the constitutional process. Keep in mind that the Republicans, led by Abraham Lincoln, fought the Southern Democrats over slavery, the only country to do what we did to stop the practice of slavery, at least the way we did it. It was the Democrat left who fought to keep their slaves. Keep in mind that the Democrat, evil President Woodrow Wilson, resegregated the military and played his favorite movie as the first movie ever played in the White House, entitled The Birth of a Nation, which was a massively racist Ku Klux Klan-based movie. Keep in mind that Planned Parenthood, under founder Margaret Sanger, purposefully placed abortion clinics in heavily black locations and bribed corrupt black ministers to preach to their black congregations the benefits of abortion in so-called family planning. Sanger felt that the blacks were less developed on the evolutionary scale and were basically impure degenerates that needed to be eliminated in order to advance the human race. Keep in mind that civil rights were signed into law by a Democrat president, who vowed that he would never sign any civil rights for blacks, until the Republican House and Senate, who held power, threatened him that if he didn't sign the bill, they would expose him. The Democrat president signed it because he wanted to keep his job and didn't really care one bit about blacks. Keep in mind that the Democrats came up with all of these social programs, the welfare programs, with the literal intent to keep blacks subservient to the government. Just a new form of slavery. And somehow that's where we are today. If you don't know that you're voting Democrat, you ain't black. Now, just recently, and you can find this anywhere, Obama was caught off mic talking with a group of the brothers, his words, about his displeasure that Negroes were getting uppity and trying to leave the plantation. My words. Prior to a rally in Pennsylvania, Obama spoke with a small group of black voters for Harris. Remember, swap it, white voters for Trump. How fast would every mainstream government-owned media outlet trip over themselves to shout how racist that is? Anyway, black voters for Harris, and he said this, quote, "We have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running. That seems to be more pronounced with the brothers. Part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman as president, and you're coming up with other alternatives and reasons for that. Women in our lives have been getting our backs this entire time. When we're in trouble and the system isn't working for us, they're the ones out there marching and protesting. And now you're thinking about sitting out or supporting somebody who has a history of denigrating you because you think that's a sign of strength. Because that's what being a man is, putting people down, that's unacceptable." Oh, I'd like to ask, can he hear himself? But he can. He knows he's lying. He hates old Joe as much as anybody else could because President Vegetable has been historically one of the most closeted racists in government. All you have to do is make a quick Google search for Biden racist comments or something like that. You'll get a slew of results. That's right, a slew. But that said, Obama knows what he's saying. He knows he's lying. He knows why the blacks are not wanting to vote for this woman. But see, if you're black and not wanting to vote for Kamala, it's because she's a woman, clearly, and how dare you? If you're a black, you need to vote for a black, regardless of if she's a she or if she's a he or he's a they or they's whatever. You vote based on blackness. Got it? Kamala and her Democrat, look, I repeat myself here, horde have been trying to push this party of joy thing. Well, joy comes from the Lord. It comes from being saved. What they're actually pushing is oblivious ecstasy or unrestrained hedonism, basically the freedom to do whatever you want to do. Neither Kamala nor Barack nor Joe, definitely not Jill, nor I'd maintain any Democrat today could have true joy as they're not saved. That said, Obama, in his few recent appearances, including on camera berating the brothers, telling them to get back on the plantation, does not look joyful. Thankfully, black men and women and even some of the more bland-looking Democrats are pushing back. They're waking up to the idea, just as some of the unions are, that maybe the Democrats are actually not their friend, that maybe the Democrats see them as votes, as useful idiots to retain power while never actually doing anything for them, despite what they claim. In fact, according to various polls, Harris is hemorrhaging black male voters, with Trump being poised to garner more of the black male vote than any Republican candidate since 1960. That's a good thing. So the question is, are blacks beholden to the Democrats? Well, I mean, in a world where everyone is a demographic, still no. Nobody is beholden to anybody for votes. If you owe your vote to someone, that's akin to blackmail, or at best a compromise vote. Voters should evaluate the candidates, the party platform, the presented policies, and make their choice based on that. Just as justice is supposed to be blind, voting should be blind as well. Male, female, I mean, legitimately so, not the mental illness type. Ethnicity, color, I'd argue even religion or lack thereof. None of those should matter. Who is the best for the job? Who best represents the country? Who best represents your belief system and worldview? That's what's important. Even implying that blacks or any other demographic is expected to vote for a specific party is racist and demeaning. And might I just throw a little side note in there? Blacks are humans, as are whites, as are browns, as are red and yellow, black and white, that sort of thing. They're all human. Blacks need to vote for the best human, just as whites do, just as everyone else does. But Dan, you say, You just said that if we're Christians, we must vote, and that vote must be for the Republican. Why, that's right, I did, which is why that's where we'll step into next, that topic. Let me caveat that with this, if I might. Now, if your choice was Mitt Romney, like if that was your only choice, or a Liz Cheney, or any of the other spineless, weak rhino Democrat lights, well, I mean, first of all, y'all should have done a better job in your primary process. But again, you choose the best you can. We'll get to that concept in a few minutes. So, Not the Bee put out an article the other day. Headline, "Oh noes, guys, Christian nationalism has taken over. Kamala is creating a faith advisory board and will campaign at churches." Okay, so look, if your church is being used as a venue for a political something, I have to question your church. If your church is putting a political figure either side of the aisle behind the pulpit on a Sunday morning, you're not a church. Stop pretending, either be honest as to what you are, whatever that is, or just close your doors. You're embarrassing yourself. But Kamala has started her Souls to the Polls initiative, per ABC News, in effort to get black churchgoers to get out to vote and vote for her because, black. So Kamala doesn't want any of these hateful Christians to attend her rallies, but she sure does want them at the polls dropping their marble for her. Why? Well, because she's losing voting blocks everywhere. Now, I think the only voting blocks she's not really hurting in are the middle-aged white women, and I'll reserve comment about you and the potential suckage quantity you may possess. Don't worry, I can say that. I've got a white friend. So yeah, again, Kamala doesn't care about your religion except that she wants you to keep it safely locked up at home or behind the stained glass windows. Other than that, go vote for someone who absolutely hates the God you purport to believe in. Keep in mind, the Democrats hate the Christian religion. Yes, I know they identify as various religions most of the time, but as with most everything they do, that's just for political purposes. They don't actually believe it. How do I know? Well, look at what they believe politically, and no, the incredibly pitiful excuse of, well, I keep my religion separate from my politics. Well, that's stupid. That doesn't count. What that really means is that you don't believe what you claim to believe. That's pretty much all. See, I'm a Christian, but I vote for abortion because just because I believe it's wrong, I don't believe my belief should enter my politics. See, that's a long way around to go to say that you're not a Christian. Next time, just try saying, I vote for abortion because I'm going to hell as an unrepentant sinner. That seems easier, more direct. Remember, narrow gate, narrow path, few who find it. According to a Pew Research Center poll from April 2024, 59% of Protestants either are or lean Republican. 38% are or lean Democrat. So, I can say right there, 38% of Protestants aren't Christians. White evangelicals are split 85-14. White non-evangelicals are 58-39. Black Protestants are split 11% Republican, 84% Democrat. Now, am I actually saying that 84% of black Protestants aren't saved? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. At least that's where I start. Now, let's do some investigation to see how close that number is. And that is terrifyingly sad. That is a major change in less than the last 100 years from where the black population used to be. Hispanics are split pretty even, 49 Republican, 45 Democrat. That's also terrifying. Then we move to Catholics, all Catholics. And let me preface this. Catholics are really the most active religion against abortion. The main thing the Democrats are running on this time around is abortion. So all Catholics are split 52-44 leaning Republican. White Catholics are 61-37. Hispanic Catholics are 35-60 for the Democrats. Horrifying. And to make things worse, black Protestants are less for Republicans and the same or more for Democrats than atheists, agnostics, or the infamous nuns, no religion in particular. Guys, this is bad. When you politically have trouble distinguishing those who profess to believe the Bible from those who say there's nothing out there, something is wrong. Very, very wrong. Even worse, when you have any more than, let's say, 10%, because you always get 10% of any group who are crazy, 10% who claim to believe the Bible, who side with a party who a number of years ago couldn't agree to include God in their platform anymore, who just this last week said if you believe that Jesus is Lord, that you're in the wrong place, who believe you should be able to murder an unborn baby, and it's not murder because you can't see it, who believe children should be able to make their own decision about being mutilated inside and out, who believe allowing people, generally women and children, to be sex trafficked is okay as long as they're the brown people from down south, who believe we should let criminals walk and take the means of protection out of the hands of law-abiding citizens, who believe the solution to everything is take money from the supposed rich and give it to whichever demographic they need to shore up in order to get their vote in, who fly everywhere to tell the world how evil we are for wanting to drive cars and heat our homes, and the list is nearly endless. When you have more than those crazy 10% of people who claim to believe the Bible supporting that, we're in dire straits, and I'm not talking about the band where you can get your money for nothing and your chicks for free. Look, we've got the group Evangelicals for Harris, who, if they're the latter, they definitely aren't the former. This is a group of hell-bound, unsaved individuals that like to play church, or at least they like to play at playing church, but want their degenerate lifestyle more. Evangelicals for Harris is actually trying to use Billy Graham and Mr. Fred Rogers in their ads, trying to claim that those two individuals would back Harris because we're supposed to love our neighbor, which I guess means let them murder their babies and mutilate their children or something. Seems like Graham for sure would be against that, and I refuse to believe that Mr. Rogers would agree with any of that. They have a section that I'll read verbatim. If you're saved, unlike literally every single member of the Evangelicals for Harris, this should make you cringe, severely cringe. You may also experience stomach cramping, hives, swollen goiter, cankles, gout, eye tremors, or dry mouth. Quote, "Who are we? We are a community of evangelicals upholding our values in the 2024 election. No political party or leader can ever hold our full devotion. That belongs to Jesus alone. As we approach this election, our hearts are drawn to a path that reflects his teachings. We're choosing the peace that comes from joy, the strength found in loving our neighbors, and the grace in showing compassion. This isn't just a vote, it's a reflection of our faith. In this election, the choice is clear. Kamala Harris." Yeah, look, I agree. No political party or leader can ever hold our full devotion. I agree that our full devotion is to Jesus alone. I agree that our path should reflect teachings of Jesus. And I agree that this vote is a reflection of our faith. The rest is utter blasphemous garbage. Peace that comes from joy, that's nice. I wonder if the baby parts felt peace and joy as they were ripped apart. Loving our neighbors, I'm sure the young girl with no more breast tissue and massive forearm scars as they strip the skin away to make a fake penis is feeling that neighborly love, or the boy that was castrated and emasculated in order to help him pretend that he's not a he. That's some good love right there, isn't it? These people are sick, twisted, unsaved, hell-bound sinners. And I know I keep saying that. I want to make it very clear that the choice is very clear. There's one side who is sick, evil, demonic, and I'd argue at the very least the leadership of that party is demonically possessed. Do you seriously think that Kamala Harris isn't possessed by at least a legion of demons? Look in her eyes. Just look in her eyes, if you dare. Now, the other side, it isn't a ton better, admittedly. And I lay the blame for how far the Republican Party has fallen squarely on the shoulders of Christians. Christians, including Catholics and all the so-called Protestant cults like Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, etc., are, I think, the largest voting bloc combined in the country. I'm pretty sure that's correct. We can literally dictate the direction of our local, state, and federal governments if we actually got off of our theology and our piety and we voted. Christians who sit at home because they feel that neither candidate is Jesus-level perfect, as well as those who choose to throw away their vote on some nobody who has absolutely no chance of even competing, well, frankly, they piss me off more than the supposed Christians who vote Democrat. At least those Christians in name only are voting for what they believe. Did you know that the witches have endorsed Kamala Harris? I mean, yeah, look, we all know that T-Swift endorsed Harris. I'm talking about the witches who openly admit to being witches. And they're busy casting spells for ballots. So that's nice. Evangelicals and witches uniting to vote for Kamala. Sounds right, right? Right. So to finish this segment, let's get back to my main premise. If you're a Christian, you are duty-bound to vote, and you must vote for the Republican in nearly 100% of the cases, or else I think your salvation can be legitimately and should be legitimately questioned. In 2020, I was a little squishier on the stance. Maybe you're saved, but you're just really, really stupid. Or you're really ignorant and uninformed. I can't give those caveats anymore. Even with the government-controlled media, there are so many channels of communication and information, you have to be dead to not know the difference in the party platforms. And all of those are voting for Kamala, so there's that. So found on the libertydaily.com, headline, 3 biblical reasons conservative Christians should vote in this election. Now, this author starts his article by saying that he urges his fellow believers to cast their ballots and, quote, I also ask pastors to tell their flocks to vote without endorsing one candidate over another. Now, look, I sort of agree. I think that short of endorsement, if a pastor chooses to jump into the political fray, that's their choice. They can clearly articulate each party's platform, who the candidate is for each platform, and what the Bible says about those platform positions. That's if they so choose to do. So, he does a lot of legwork. You can read that if you'd like, but let's jump into the 3 points. Number 1, honor the ruling authorities. He cites Romans 13, that we're supposed to be subject to our governments. He cites Jesus in John 18, saying that his kingdom is not of this world. So our government on earth in America is the 3 branches that are set up in the Constitution. He says, quote, I would argue that in modern America, if you are a citizen with the right to vote, honoring the governing authorities entails educating yourself on the major issues and casting a ballot in your local, state, and federal elections. I fully agree. He then cites Paul again in Romans 13, saying that the government's role is to punish evildoers and reward the good. Quote, at the most basic level, following the Apostle Paul's directive here involves casting a ballot in the way that will best help the government be a servant of God's ultimate justice while acknowledging that human justice is limited. My thoughts. We have a duty to participate in our government because we have that right to try to ensure our government is in the best position possible to fulfill their duty. To sit back and just let it all go to hell, which is what we're doing by not voting, is doing nothing but heaping judgment upon judgment on the heads of those that are in the governmental positions who are not upholding this duty, because they shouldn't be there in the first place. Number 2, seek the peace of the city. Quote, some Christians might object that casting a ballot represents an endorsement of flawed candidates or a flawed system, and therefore they should protect their consciences by not implicating themselves in a broken political system. He then cites and explains Jeremiah 29, 4-7, with the context that this was written to Jewish exiles, but the concept is directly applicable. Quote, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. Christians live in a sort of exile on earth as citizens of heaven. As St. Augustine wrote in his magnificent book, The City of God, Christians should work for the peace and prosperity of the earthly city in which we live, while longing for the heavenly city where our true citizenship and fulfillment reside. This means voting in elections, sometimes for the lesser of what may seem to be 2 evils, because our votes will make a difference and can help the health of the earthly city where we currently dwell. My thoughts. Yes, sir. Amen. Continue on. Number 3, instruments of God. He cites the sovereignty of God in all things, including elections. He explains that God is in control of our nation, our Constitution, and then he cites Romans 8:28 and Proverbs 21, which says, quote, the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. That said, our vote is important just as our prayers are important in the plan and purpose of God. So voting may not be a perfect science. We may not be able to vote in a candidate or a government that loves and obeys God, but that's for God to deal with. Our job is to be his hands and feet, his instruments in the election results. My thoughts. Make no mistake that this nation is under judgment right now. I again maintain that we are under judgment because, at least in large part, we, Christians, have ignored and abdicated our duty. We have compartmentalized everything in this life. God goes over here, science goes over here, politics over there, family up there, work down there. That's not how life works. We, Christians, are responsible. We've been lax, lazy, and negligent in our duty. Joe Biden is the president because God placed him there, as he did with every other president this nation has ever had, using us as his instruments of blessing or judgment. We have brought God's ordained judgment on our nation by not doing our duty to keep God in this nation. We're culpable. We're responsible. And to neglect our duty, allowing evil people to be elected into positions of power, well, I believe we will not be held blameless. I, for one, have enough sin and failure in my life. When I stand before God, this is one area where I can at least say, in my capacity, I did the best I could with what I had to work with. So let me finish with this. I saved a meme from a Facebook page the other day. I follow this page. The meme is entitled, "How Will I Vote in November?" It gives a bullet point list and the supporting scripture for each point. It's only a few points. I'll finish the segment by reading the points in the scripture, and then that'll be it. Before I do that, let me implore you one last time. Vote. Vote as a Christian should vote. There's a party who hates God, hates Christians, hates the light, hates truth. That's the Democrat Party. Then we have a party that's compromised, admittedly severely compromised in some areas, but it's still salvageable if we, Christians, get back in the game. And then the next election in 2 years, we're back in the game. And then again and again and again. And in a handful of elections, we could swing this Titanic of a nation back around to a course away from the iceberg, much closer to what it should be. Trump isn't Jesus. Trump isn't even saved. Trump isn't my favorite choice. I would have preferred DeSantis, who also isn't perfect. But Trump is who God has ordained to be the Republican candidate. Trump is not running for pastor-in-chief or the American Pope. He's running for president in a broken system, in a broken nation, in a broken world. He is literally the better of two evils. And I would argue better by far, which is based off more how bad Kamala and the Democrats are than how good Trump and the Republicans are. You may not like Trump. I get that. But a vote for Trump isn't an endorsement of his language, his lifestyle, or anything else. It's a vote to turn the ship around just a little, so that in the next election, we can turn it around a little more, and so on. Christians who vote Democrat aren't Christians, flat out. Christians who refuse to vote, I believe, are living with unrepentant sin in their lives by neglecting the right and duty that God has granted them to try to install a government who rewards good and punishes evil based on the standards found in the Bible. Do with that as you will. I believe that Christians have no excuse, none. And I would say that if you don't vote, don't take communion, not until you make that right, however that's possible. So, knowing that this is a microcosm of what the list could be, knowing that this may not be a perfect list, tying all that's been said in this segment, how will I vote in November? Number one, I will vote for the most pro-life candidate because God hates the shedding of innocent blood. Proverbs 6:16 through 19. There are 6 things which Yahweh hates, even 7 which are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked thoughts, feet that hasten to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. Number 2. I will vote for the most pro-Israel candidate because God blesses those who bless Israel and curses those who don't. Genesis 12:1 through 3. And Yahweh said to Abram, "Go forth from your land and from your kin and from your father's house to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." Number 3, I will vote for the most pro-debt reduction candidate because the borrower is the slave to the lender. Proverbs 22:7. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender. Point number 4, I will vote for the most pro-work candidate because God says if a man won't work, let him not eat. 2 Thessalonians 3:10-12. For even when we were with you, we used to command this to you. If anyone is not willing to work, neither let him eat. For we hear that some among you are walking in an unruly manner, doing no work at all, but acting like busybodies. Now such persons we command and exhort in the Lord Jesus Christ that working with quietness, they eat their own bread. Number 5, I will vote for the most pro-marriage candidate because God is for marriage as defined in the Bible. Genesis 2:24, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Point number 6, I will vote for the candidate who most closely believes government's purpose is to reward good and punish evil. Romans 13:1-7. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist have been appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists that authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of that authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same, for it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword in vain, for it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. Therefore, it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of that wrath, but also because of conscience. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Render to all what is due them, tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. And finally, number 7, I will vote based as close as I can on God's word. 2 Timothy 3:16-17. All Scripture is God-breathed and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be equipped, having been thoroughly equipped for every good work. The year was 1989. I was just into my teens. DC Talk had just come out with their first album. Christian rap was becoming a thing, and wow, was a lot of it just terrible. Of course, rap in general at that time wasn't great necessarily, but Christian rap was way behind even that curve. That said, because my mom, let me reiterate that really quick here, my mom, who has always been old, just like my dad, because that's what parents are when you're a kid, right? Even though I'm way older now than they were then, doesn't matter. My mom bought the self-titled DC Talk cassette tape and brought it home. Not for me, not for my sister, for herself. I mean, we could listen to it as well, but she bought it for herself. And with that, my appreciation for rap, as much as someone as nerdy and scrawny and really, really white as I am, well, that's when my love and appreciation for rap was born. Now, somehow, also in 1989, I purchased the Ultimate Rap Cassette. Now, this was a collection of the supposed best of Christian rap at that time, and wow. This cassette, well, it had DC Talk's Heaven Bound. That's a fantastic song. JC and the Boys, that's spelled, of course, with a Z, and they had a song called Crack, which was basically a song about doing crack and how you'll die or something like that. It was kind of scary at 13 years old. There was a song by Stephen Wiley called Rappin' for Jesus. This is the reason I know the Old Testament books, and I still know them by reciting this rap in my head. I'm not lying. The New Testament, I mean, he tacked it on there as well. I never got it quite so well using that one. I don't know why, but Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song, Psalm, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel. And then we got Daniel, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, because Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrew, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st and 2nd 3rd John, Jude to Revelation. The word's gonna save this nation if we learn the word from Genesis to Revelation. See what I mean? Then there was a song on this cassette by a group called the Raptures, not the Raptures, the Raptures. And this song was called Samson and Delilah. And wow, did I hate that song. It still, even today, sits at the top of my list for one of the worst songs ever. Now look, this is not their fault. All these guys and all these groups were trying to do is figure out what Christian rap was supposed to sound like. These guys, they tried something. They shouldn't have, but here we are. Now, it took me about a half hour to figure out the name of the cassette. Sadly, although I still have a number of my old cassette tapes, I don't have that one. Or the Ultimate Rap 2 cassette that I used to have. I don't have that one either. But once I figured out the name, found the track listing, it took me probably another 10 or 15 minutes to dig through and find the Samson and Delilah song. And because of all of my hard work, oh yeah, you get to hear a little sample of it.
Samson and Delilah. Samson and Delilah. Samson was a strong and powerful man. All his life, God had his hand. He never cut his hair and he kept his beard long. A sign that to God he did belong. One day a lion threatened him. He ripped apart the lion limb by limb. And Samson was always fighting with the Philistines. Samson fought every day it seemed. Samson, 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 woo, you're so strong. Samson, 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 woo, you're so strong. Samson, 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 woo, you're so strong. Samson, 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 woo, you're so strong.
Yeah, I know. I know. Now, as bad as that is, on the flip side of that tape, they had the Samson and Delilah audio track only. I guess in case you wanted to, I don't know, sing it at a wedding or karaoke to it or something like that. I have no idea. And if you think that that rap with the lyrics is bad, wow, the soundtrack is basically just like a 4-note run or something like that, just repeated ad infinitum. I mean, it's just over and over, and it's just terrible. Just terrible. Now look, to my credit, I fast forwarded through that song literally every single time, but wow, was it terrible. So the question likely flooding your now throbbing temples is, why are you doing this to me? Well, found on usnews.com from 2008, our topic for part 8 of our Hear Them Roar mini-series headline, The New View of Delilah as a Sex in the City type of woman. Subtitle, One Feisty Femme. And to put a bow on this, every single time I hear the names Samson and Delilah, I can't help but think, Samson, 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 you're so strong, and just rue the day of my birth because of it. And now you are now cursed with this curse as well. And you're welcome. So to be honest, this one is probably one of the least bad of the various articles, mostly until we get towards the end. But again, the unsaved world desires to read between the lines, look beyond the accepted point of the account, ignore chunks of important text, and pretty much draw their own conclusions. And as I've said before, that's not how we're supposed to read the Bible. Our author of this article, Ms. Linda L. Creighton, starts off her analysis like this, quote, "The tale of Samson and Delilah has migrated over the centuries from the realm of Sunday school stories to its current place in modern culture as, depending on one's perspective, a morality play, a feminine discourse, or a caution to lovesick men. Samson has become a byword for strength, Delilah a synonym for temptress. The crossroads of their lives is a train wreck whose meaning remains open to interpretation." And see, this is the problem. It's not really open for interpretation. It's not a morality tale. This, again, is a historical account of real people who actually lived, and the accounts actually happened. Interpretation really shouldn't enter into this, because interpretation, the way they mean it at least, is eisegesis. It's reading into the Bible based on our worldview. We're supposed to read and study the Bible for what it's telling us, not the other way around. So Ms. Creighton gives a very short, one-paragraph, inadequate summary of who Samson is, but that was, I think, just kind of to give us a little more tantalizing possibility to whet our appetite? Quote, "It is a classic tale of romance and betrayal, complete with violence, money, and special effects. But like most biblical stories, what is not said about Delilah is as important as what is. Who was Delilah? Was she a pawn, a Judas, or a strong woman and survivor? And what is this story really all about?" Well, I don't know about you, but I'm excited to find out. She quotes Susan Ackerman, who is, deep breath here, a professor of religion and women's and gender studies at Dartmouth College. She says, quote, "It's a story about God delivering Israel." Okay, first of all, I can't believe it. I mean, she's not wrong. Okay, and she goes on, quote, "One of the things that always strikes me about this story is what an unbelievable idiot Samson is." And, again, she's not wrong on that point. Okay, so the author jumps through a very, very basic summary of this account. Now, I think I'll do the same as I've done before. I'll walk through the actual account. I'll summarize more than I probably have with others because this is longer than the others, and then I'll pepper in our author's thoughts as they fit, and then we'll kind of break away and then come back to the article at hand towards the end. You'll see why. Okay, we're in the time of the judges in Israel, which unbelievably is found in the book of Judges. I mean, what are the odds? This is an extended period of time after Moses, after Joshua, but before Israel demanded a king be appointed over them. The person that they demanded give them the king is basically the final judge of Israel, Samuel. We're in the 14th to 13th century BC, give or take. Chapter 12 of Judges is where we are, and it ends with this, quote, "Then Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, judged Israel after him, and he had 40 sons and 30 grandsons, who rode on 70 donkeys, and he judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, died and was buried at Parathon in the land of Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites." Okay, so Israel is now without a judge, which is how chapter 13 begins, quote, "Then the sons of Israel again did what was evil in the eyes of Yahweh, so that Yahweh gave them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. Now, to put that in some sort of perspective, that's about 1/6 of the entire history of the United States that they were in the hands of the Philistines. Moving quickly, there was a man who had a wife who had not been able to have children. The angel of Yahweh appeared to her, told her that she would have a child. She was not to drink wine or strong drink, not to eat anything unclean, and when the child is born, his hair was not to be cut, ever, because he was going to be a Nazirite from birth. And she was told that he would begin to save Israel from the Philistines. And chapter 13 reveals that this was likely a Christophany, an appearance of God the Son, the Christ, prior to his coming to earth as fully God and fully man. We know him as Jesus. So the woman gave birth, named him Samson, and God blessed him as he grew. Quick side note, what is the Nazirite thing? All right. Well, by definition, this is a vow. It's the Nazirite vow that someone voluntarily takes for him or herself to consecrate him or herself to God completely. The vow is for a specific time frame, and when it's done, is concluded with a sacrifice. Now, while bound by the vow, the person undertaking the vow is to abstain from wine or fermented beverages, even grape juice, grapes, and raisins or raisin skins, just in case. Next, they were not to cut their hair for the duration of the vow. And third, they were not to become unclean by touching a dead body. In fact, they weren't even to go near a corpse, even if it was a member of their own family. Now, there were caveats for very unique circumstances, but even at that, the person under the vow may have to start the clock over on their vowed time if they become unclean. At the conclusion of the vow, there's a sacrificial ritual, the head is shaven, the hair is thrown into the fire with the offering, and the individual is then free to partake of wine. Samson was unique because he had no say in this. His mother was told that he would be a Nazirite from birth, and that was it. Our author is correct that Samson seems to have a weakness for the ladies. It starts fairly early on, finding a Philistine woman he wanted to marry. His parents try to talk him out of it, but, as is common with all things, we're told again of God's sovereign hand in this. Quote, "His father and mother did not know that it was of Yahweh, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines." Now at that time, the Philistines were ruling over Israel. So God, who caused the Philistines to oppress the Israelites because of their disobedience, he was using or ordaining Samson's weakness for women to heighten the tension between the Israelites and the Philistines for his purpose. The author of our article says, quote, Samson's deeds now seem extreme in their violence. And yeah, I guess she's right. We get the first glimpse when he's attacked by a lion and he, quote, tore it as one tears a young goat. Now, I'm less aghast at him tearing a lion apart with his bare hands than I am with the throwaway comment that apparently tearing apart young goats was a common enough occurrence that it made sense as a comparison. Ugh. But Samson doesn't do this of his own accord. Quote, and the Spirit of Yahweh came upon him mightily. Now, we'll see this more than a few times throughout Samson's life. A difference between the Old and New Testament is that those of us who are saved today have the Holy Spirit within us at all times. Doesn't leave. In the Old Testament, you'll see language saying that the capital S Spirit, it's the Holy Spirit, came upon a man or left a man or something like that. It was a temporary thing, including for Samson. Anyway, he killed this lion, left the carcass, went to speak with this woman, and yeah, he liked her, so he came back later to go get her, and apparently a swarm of bees had made a hive in the lion's body. He scooped out the honey, ate some himself, gave some to his parents, but he never told anyone that he actually did that. He went to go get this woman with his dad, apparently, and apparently they got married. Made a bet with the men there at the wedding that they couldn't guess his riddle. He crafted a riddle, as it were. Side note, he was no Solomon here, but he did his best, I guess, and he made a bet that if they could guess the answer, he would give each of them 30 men, 30 linen wraps and 30 changes of clothes, right? One for each man. But if they couldn't guess, they had to give him that same amount. They had 7 days, and they weren't getting it. The men came to Samson's now wife to convince her to find out the answer and tell them so that they wouldn't be impoverished. Seems a bit dramatic to say they'd be impoverished by each one of them giving a change of clothes and a linen wrap, but okay, whatever. Long story short, she convinced him to tell her. She told the men. They guessed correctly, obviously. Now, Samson knew that his wife had betrayed him, but he was going to hold to his end of the deal. He went to Ashkelon, which was a city of the Philistines. Quote, the Spirit of Yahweh came upon him mightily, and he killed 30 men, took their stuff, gave it to the men that he owed. Then he left his wife there, went back to his father's house, because he was angry. So her dad gave her to Samson's alleged friend instead of to Samson, as he felt that Samson had abandoned her. So after a bit, he decided to go back to his wife, but her dad had to give him the bad news that she was given to his friend, and I think her dad was being serious that he thought Samson was done with her. I think he was innocent kind of in this. He even offered Samson his younger daughter, which was really nice of him, I guess. But Samson didn't want that. Samson was angry. So he went and caught 300 foxes, tied the tails in pairs, put a lit torch on the ends of the tied tails, and let them loose in the fields and the vineyards of the Philistines, absolutely destroying their crops. Now, notice that it doesn't say the Spirit of Yahweh came upon him mightily. At least we're not told it did. So my assumption is that he did this in his own strength. Well, the Philistines weren't happy about this, obviously. They found out why he did it, so they took the dad, and who Samson thought was his wife, and burned them alive. Samson then judged the Philistines and struck them ruthlessly with a great slaughter because they did this. The whole thing is revenge upon vengeance, all because of a stupid riddle, because of a stupid lion, and because Samson seems to be kind of a meathead. Our author summed up the entire narrative we just went through like this, quote, Samson, perhaps predictably, did not have a good track record with women. His name, meaning sun hero, was an indication of the temperature of his passion in love and in war. He would visit a prostitute, a point singled out in the Bible, and had a weakness for Philistine women. At the rehearsal dinner for his first marriage, he made a bet with his guests, which his fiancée later divulged. Enraged, he slaughtered 30 men to pay off his wager, and his bride-to-be was burned to death in retaliation. Okay, so look. No, he hadn't yet visited a prostitute. That's coming. But more importantly, our author mentioned the lion earlier, but not the honey. The prostitute was later. She mentioned the foxes earlier, but not why he did this with the foxes. Then back in this paragraph, his bride-to-be was actually his bride, and she wasn't burned to death because of the 30 men. She and her father were burned to death as retaliation by their own people for the destruction Samson had wrought on their land. She's got all the things in there. She's just got them wrong. Well, not even all the things, but she still has them wrong. She also mentions the next major event in her article. You'd think that if she wanted to summarize the story, she'd at least do it in some sort of order. Her point was that he was a violent, hot-headed, womanizing pigman. So I guess if you rearrange things and leave out key points, that's what you can get, maybe more effectively. Now, don't get me wrong. He did have an eye for the ladies. He was, as I said, probably a meathead, it appears. He was prone to violence, but so far the torch foxtail thing was the only thing the Holy Spirit was not empowering him to do. Again, I'm assuming, based on the text. She then jumps into Delilah, but we have a little bit more legwork to do before we get there. We shall endeavor to persevere. After the fox thing and the burning alive thing and the Samson slaughtering the Philistines thing, remember, we're told that, quote, for Yahweh was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. Now, at that time, the Philistines were ruling over Israel. Keep in mind, God is sovereign in all this. And I know that that makes some people feel very uncomfortable. But if you lessen the sovereignty of God, you should feel way more uncomfortable, if you really think about it. So, look, after all this, Samson was living in a cave, and an army of the Philistines camped in Judah with the intention of taking Samson back with them for, you guessed it, some more revenge. Well, the men of Judah didn't like the Philistines in their land, so they gathered up 3,000 of their own men to come and capture and hand over Samson. One of their own, not fight the Philistines, capture and hand over Samson. They came to the cave and they asked Samson what he's done. Doesn't he know that they are ruled by the Philistines? Why is he making trouble with their overlords? They told him that they were going to bind him and hand him over. So Samson agreed to be bound with the 2 new ropes they had brought and was brought to the camp of the Philistines. As they got to the camp, wait for it, quote, the Spirit of Yahweh came upon him mightily, so that the ropes that were on his arms were as flax that is burned with fire. Basically, he snapped the ropes like Hulk Hogan shreds his tank top. So now with no ropes and the Spirit of Yahweh mightily upon him, he found the jawbone of and we're going to keep this G-rated, donkey, and killed 1,000 men with it. And yes, Samson killing 1,000 men? Very impressive. Not arguing that at all. But can we just give our props or tip our hats or pour one out, depending on your worldview, for that jawbone? I mean, that's a pretty sturdy jawbone. He then got very thirsty, called out to God, saying he was dying of thirst, which might not have been much of an exaggeration, to be honest, and God, quote, split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out of it. Samson drank his fill, and I guess at that point was made Israel's next judge. At least this is the first mention of him being a judge. And he judged Israel for 20 years while being under the control of the Philistines. Then we come to the final chapter of Samson's, let's just say, interesting life. First, we find him in Gaza with a prostitute. The Gazites, apparently not learning from literally everyone, thought they'd just wait by the city gate, which would have been locked up tight for the night. And when he came out to leave in the morning, they would just nab him, just nab him, piece of cheese. But about midnight, I'm not sure how nobody heard this, Samson went to the gate, lifted the likely large iron gate, I would assume, and the 2 posts that the gate hung on, ripped them from the wall and the ground and carried them on his shoulders up to the top of the mountain outside the city. Now, once again, we do not see that the Spirit of Yahweh came upon him mightily. And as I said, I have no idea how these nabbers didn't see him or didn't wake up, but that's not for me to figure out. Okay, now we get to the good stuff. Miss Delilah. Well, Samson, and we're not told how he saw her or met her. I think some try to tie her as the prostitute just a few verses earlier in Gaza. That doesn't really seem to fit the text. No matter. Samson was smitten by her. That's right. I said smitten. And the Philistines wanted Samson dead, but they knew they couldn't do it because of Samson's strength. So they convinced Delilah to try to find out the secret to his strength. If she could deliver the answer, each of the lords of the Philistines, allegedly there were 5 rulers, would give her 1,100 pieces of silver each. We don't have any way of knowing how much money this actually is, except, of course, for speculation. Now, I found a speculative calculation based on the shekel and the current price of silver today, etc., and possibly it could have been, maybe, if we assume, am I using enough qualifiers here, that she, in theory, could have maybe been offered a sum of around maybe $85,000 or so. Now, I definitely wouldn't turn that down today. That's what, maybe 2 years worth of the average salary in the U.S. at this point. But in the grand scheme of things, especially at her, I think we're assuming her youngish age at least, right? She's got a lot of life to live, a lot of life ahead of her. That's not a lot of money, right? But whatever the amount, it was substantial enough in her eyes, so she agreed. And again, speculation, but it doesn't sound like she really had to think it over, like she negotiated or felt conflicted. It kind of appears she agreed right away. Now, on top of that speculation, even more speculation runs rampant here. Was she just money hungry? Maybe. Was she poor? Maybe. Some speculate that her mother was widowed and they were poor and Delilah couldn't pass up the chance to take care of her mother and herself. I don't know. That may be stretching the text a bit too far. To be honest, it really doesn't matter what her reasoning was. It matters that she agreed. Now, this is where the author of the article wants to be, the land of speculation with regard to Delilah. So let's see what the Bible actually says. Then we'll wander back to our article and see what she says. The entire Samson and Delilah account takes place in about 17 verses, that's all. She tries 3 times to get Samson to tell her the secret of his strength, each time ramping up the rhetoric, the lies, the drama about if he really loved her, he'd tell her. Ladies, that's not fair. Don't do that. Anyway, first he tells her that if he is bound by 7 fresh cords that haven't been dried, he would become weak like every other man. And again, I'm a little offended over here. So she bound him, then cried out that the Philistines were there, and he snapped the cords like nothing. And he next told her that if he was bound by new ropes that hadn't been used for work yet, he would become weak like every... You know what? Let's skip that last bit. So she did that, cried out that the Philistines were there, and again, rope shards went flying everywhere. Then he told her that if his hair was divvied into 7 locks, then woven on a loom into the web, whatever that is, I'm not a weaver, nor am I a loom expert, and fastened with a pin, and you know the rest of the lie. Then she cries out, and he probably destroyed the loom, yanking his hair out. I don't know. Keep in mind, Samson is always pictured as some Fabio-looking hunk. I don't know what he looked like or how muscly he was, but his hair was probably like Guinness Book of World Records long. If he had never cut it, and he's now, what, late 30s to early 40s, maybe? I mean, by the time he met Delilah, he had almost been married. And then it said he judged Israel for 20 years. So even if he tried to get married at his bar mitzvah at 13, still puts him in his maybe mid-30s when he met Delilah. I don't know. So his hair was probably a long mess by this time. That's kind of my point. Anyway, continuing on, we're now at time number 4. The drama has been ramped up to 11 out of 10, and he'd come dangerously close on the last lie. Gotta believe that he thought himself to be hilarious through all this. Typical muscles for brains. Don't tell him I said that. So, with drama fully elevated and, quote, his soul annoyed to death, Samson finally reveals the truth. Quote, "A razor has never come on my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like every other man." So she got him to sleep on her knees, got a man to come shave his head, had the Philistines standing by, and once more she cried out that the Philistines were there. He woke up, and as it reads, quote, "He did not know that Yahweh had left him. The vow was broken, the bond was broken." The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, brought him to Gaza, bound him in bronze chains, and he was made a grinder in the prison. As he stayed there, his hair began to grow out once again. Now, we don't have a time frame for how long Samson was in prison before the people called for him to be brought out and entertain them, but his hair had grown back at least to some degree, obviously not 30 plus years growing back, but at least to some degree. So with a large party going on, he was brought out to the porch, for lack of a better term, to be mocked and ridiculed. A boy led him out, and Samson asked to be guided to the pillars of the house so he could lean against them. Whatever house this was apparently huge. There were about 3,000 people partying on the roof alone. The house was full. All the lords of the Philistines were there. This was a massive thing. Quote, "Then Samson called to Yahweh and said, O Lord Yahweh, please remember me and please strengthen me just this time, O God, that I may at once be avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house was established and supported himself against them, the one with his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. And he bent with his strength so that the house fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he put to death by his death were more than those whom he put to death in his life. Then his brothers and all his father's household came down, carried him, brought him up, and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah his father. Thus he had judged Israel 20 years. So, it's possible that he was in prison for some time, and that's counted in the 20 years. I don't know. But what we see here is that Samson was one last time given strength mightily by the Spirit of Yahweh so that he could be an instrument of God used to bring judgment on the Philistines. Now keep in mind that Samson, although admittedly in passing, is mentioned by name in the Hall of Faith, Hebrews 11. Solomon, as I spoke of recently, I think that was part of my book review, he's not mentioned in the Hall of Faith. There's, I think, a similar argument, at least in concept, regarding the saving faith of both Solomon and Samson in light of how they live their lives. So I think the mention or the lack of in Hebrews really speaks volumes. Now, I could be wrong about Solomon, I admit that, but it is curious. The bottom line is that Samson was an imperfect person. He was, it appears, kind of a hothead, an act first, think later kind of guy, someone with a weakness for a pretty face. He honestly sounds like a good percentage of men all throughout history, to be honest. But there's no doubt that he's in heaven today. And we'll come back to this Samson thing a little bit here later. Let's travel back to the humanist world of this article for a few moments before we wrap this up. Our author, Ms. Creighton, quotes, and here we go again, Professor of Hebrew Bible at the Episcopal Divinity College in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Ms. Gail Yee, as saying, quote, "She was obviously a powerful woman. She'd be fine nowadays, a real Sex in the City type of woman." Let's just go ahead and stop there for a moment, shall we? She was so powerful that she decided to sell out someone for money. Not really a lot of money, just some money. That's powerful? We have nothing given to us in the Bible to say that she was powerful at all, just that she was apparently fairly easily bought. She was greedy, maybe, or desperate, or whatever she was, but she didn't demand, she didn't negotiate, she agreed at their first offer. And that's powerful? And she used the power of nagging and whining and played on his love or his lust or his infatuation with her, whatever it was. She toyed with and took advantage of his emotions to flail him into submission. That's power? That's what a powerful woman does? Now, admittedly, I've never watched Sex in the City. I'd much rather put my own eyes out and grind grain in a dungeon for the rest of my life than watch an episode of those 4, I think there were 4, right? Nasty, and by nasty I mean icky women doing whatever or whoever they were doing, apparently using their powers. So would Delilah fit in as one of them? I have no idea, but that doesn't seem powerful to me. It seems like if she was powerful, she would have put life ahead of money, that she would have stood up for right rather than participate in wrong. Am I wrong here? Okay, we need to keep moving. Back to our gender and religion Dartmouth professor, Susan Ackerman. She says that it's common to think that Delilah was a prostitute. And I agree with her that there's nothing that says that. That's tying the 2 physically close verses, but differently timed verses together into one concept. I don't know. So I think that's wrong. She says that maybe she was just single, maybe she was widowed, but what we do know is that she was of high status because the 5 lords of the Philistines offered her money for Samson. Okay, we're going to have to stop again here. That's making a logical leap that's not in the text. The 5 lords likely had no idea who Delilah was, or at best, didn't really care. They were interested in Samson. They were watching Samson, and in doing so, they found that he was quite smitten with this woman, who they apparently felt was an easy mark to use in their scheme. If she was of prominence, if she was someone of high enough status in the eyes of these 5 lords, would they have put her in a position of risk like this? I mean, think about it. If Samson, the strongest man ever, someone who ripped apart lions, tore out city gates and carried them up a mountain, killed 1,000 men with a donkey jaw, if this guy found out that the woman he was, for lack of a better term, in love with was betraying him, what do you think he would have done to her? She wasn't a prominent woman. She was a pawn. She was a stooge. She was nothing to these lords. Ackerman, in her wisdom, goes on to say this, quote, "Winners write the history. I think she would come out looking quite well if we had the Philistine Bible." Ugh. Okay. That's, and this is saying something, that's one of the dumbest comments in the entire article. Let's move on. Our Hebrew scholar, Yee, rightfully, finally, states that we have nothing telling us that Delilah seduced Samson, that she was a seductress or a temptress, only that he fell in love with her. She says, when speaking of those with this opinion, that she was some seductive woman, quote, "They think of Delilah as a scantily clad Hedy Lamarr, like in the 1940s movie Samson and Delilah." Yeah, that's probably where we get a lot of our views on a lot of things, is from movies and stories, and not the Bible. Yee further goes on, again correctly, might I add, again, that Delilah simply asks Samson what the secret of his strength is, and how could someone bind him in a way he couldn't break free? I mean, she literally told him what she wanted to know. He was the dope that finally told her. Now, Yee doesn't have it all correct. She says that we don't know the motivation for Delilah, suggesting the money is only one possible option. Except that, yeah, but we're told that they offered her the money, a substantial amount, and the next thing we read is how she's asking Samson about his secret. So, I mean, there's that. Then worse, she goes on to say that we don't know why Samson finally told her the truth, and that part is true, but one of her speculations is that, quote, he may be teasing her, or he may have an unconscious wish to be bound and vanquished by this woman. The biblical text engages your imagination so that you have questions about why Samson is nuts enough to do this 3 times. I mean, look, the Bible doesn't tell us, Samson, being a meathead, finally told Delilah his secret. Regardless, I don't think we need to wander into 50 Shades of Samson or anything like that. I mean, is that suggestion a possibility? Sure, but we have nothing that even remotely implies that. But of course, Ms. Creighton likes this idea, as does Ms. Ackerman, who says that this entire scene of Samson telling her his secret, him laying on her lap, her lulling him to sleep, it's all profoundly sexual. Quote, "Hair is a very sexual motif, particularly for ancient Israelites. The whole business of the hair would have been a little bit titillating, as with the reference to Samson's head in her lap." I think I know a few women who need a good cold shower here or something. They could picture me naked. That would take care of their soaring blood pressure, possibly permanently. Just saying. There are probably better options, admittedly. What we know is what the Bible tells us. These 4 times of her asking were not in the same day. In fact, there might have been a day or days between his lie and her trying what he said. Think of the first instance. He said that he must be bound with 7 fresh cords that have not been dried. Okay, so she would have had to communicate that to these lords. The lords would have had to get the cords together and deliver them. I think at best we're talking the next day is when she actually tried the first one, and on and on. When he finally did tell her the truth, just about every guy can tell you what's going on here. He thought he was being funny by lying to her. He thought he was invincible, because all of us men are, until we're not. And then if Ackerman and Yee were to actually read the Bible, quote, then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have deceived me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength is." Now it happened when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him that his soul was annoyed to death. She nagged the crud out of him. That was her superpower, wearing him down with nagging and whining. He just couldn't take it anymore. Generally speaking, any honest woman knows she has this power, whether she ever uses it or not. And generally speaking, any honest man knows they could see themselves doing basically the same thing as Samson, whether they do it or not. Joking around, thinking they're funny, doing it to the point that brings this on themselves, and then finally doing anything they have to do just to make it stop. As for the sexy head in the lap thing, well, the Bible says that he slept on her knees. Again, any parent of a child, and I'd argue most anyone who has dated for some time or been married, has been both the lap for the head and the head on the lap at various times without it being a sexual thing. And again, we have absolutely nothing in the text that points to this being a seductive thing or a sexual thing. But remember, our working theory is that Delilah is a super strong, feisty femme, Sex in the City type of woman. So we have to make it this narrative, don't we? Well, Ms. Creighton wraps up her article, quickly summarizing what happens to Samson, saying that he was put to work in a prison, doing a woman's chore, milling grain. And again, no. I mean, he was in prison, that's correct. He was milling grain, that's correct. But I think the biblical scholars agree that this was not sitting at a table with a mortar and pestle, grind. Guards, I need some more grains. Remember, Samson wasn't some sand kicked in your face on the beach 100-pound weakling. He performed some miraculous feats of strength when the Holy Spirit came upon him. He also performed some pretty incredible human feats of strength, apparently absent the Holy Spirit coming upon him mightily. He was shoving, likely at this point, a large millstone around a large track, grinding a large amount of grain at one time. The implication is that he was doing the job that was typically reserved for an animal. So, she then says that the, quote, Philistines were celebrating at an agricultural festival in the temple of Dagon when they brought out Samson for their enjoyment. And no, not per the biblical account, the Bible says that they were, quote, assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to be glad, and they said, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hands. Now, could this have been at the same time as an agricultural celebration? Maybe. Dagon is supposed to be some sort of god of grain or something. Maybe. But that's not what the Bible says. I mean, not even close. If you remember, not long before Samson kills thousands in his own death, the Philistines had actually stolen the Ark of the Covenant during the battle with the Israelites when they decided that if they brought the Ark with them, then God was bound to give them victory. Instead, the Ark was captured by the Philistines and placed in their temple or in the same relic room or wherever it was, same place as their god Dagon, a half-fish, half-man god. And the first night, Dagon fell over, prostrate in front of the ark. They set Dagon back up, because he couldn't do it himself, and the next night it fell over again. This time, the hands and the head were broken off of it, and it was again laying prostrate in front of the ark. That, along with some other curses that happened, caused the Philistines to decide that maybe they need to get rid of this troublesome ark. Well, this is the temple the Philistines are partying at. I believe. It sounds like it is. And Dagon, their fish god, is what they were worshiping in this celebration. She says that his strength came back with his hair. And yes and no. His strength came back as his hair came back, but it was because of his faith in God, and because, again, the premise of the entire story of Samson was God using Samson to inflict punishment on the Philistines. Quote, his father and mother did not know that it was of Yahweh, for he was seeking an occasion against the Philistines. So Ms. Creighton says that, quote, in a final and impressive show of God-given power, the blind giant pulls down the pillars, collapses the temple, and dies with the 3,000 Philistines who have gathered to mock him. Okay, so he wasn't a giant. Nothing tells us he was some sort of a giant. He pushed down the pillars, not pulled, and yes, I know I'm being picky, sue me. And there were 3,000 on the roof. There were a ton more people than 3,000 that were celebrating, and he killed well more than 3,000. We just don't know how many more. She rightly states that there is no more mention of Delilah, and she speculates, as she's wont to do, quote, some biblical scholars suggest that she was at the temple of Dagon to view her handiwork and perished with Samson. If she survived and lived out her days as a rich and vindicated heroine, perhaps she would not care that her actions are now often portrayed as those of a seductress and Judas, rather than a clever survivor forever linked to a violent bully who ultimately was beaten by a girl. Giving the final quote to Ms. Ackerman, quote, I like feisty women, so I like Delilah. Okay, so again, there was nothing feisty, nothing strong, really nothing seductive necessarily, nothing clever about Delilah. She showed no handiwork, she showed no deception. She just asked Samson flat out what his secret was. She was someone that Samson took a liking to. She quickly allowed herself to be bought to deliver the life of someone into the hands of those who hated him. She nagged and whined, and she claimed that he didn't love her until Samson's soul was, quote, annoyed to death. And then she disappears from history. Incidentally, we never hear of Delilah again. We also never hear of Dagon again either. She doesn't appear to be someone that really considered Samson to be anyone special. If I were to guess, she probably took the money and lived her life. Maybe she felt remorse. Maybe not. Maybe she was at the celebration of Dagon. Maybe she wasn't. Maybe she died at that celebration. Maybe she didn't. Maybe it doesn't matter. The bottom line is that Samson was who God ordained at that time, someone to inflict judgment on the Philistines. See, God is sovereign. Keep coming back to this. We see examples of this over and over and also over. God using sin sinlessly to bring about his plan, crafted prior to creating the first molecule, the first atom in this entire universe. Just as God ordained sovereignly that Samson would be a Nazirite from birth, which was not a thing that happened. This was done without asking Samson, without asking his parents. God, you might say, elected Samson for this. Just as he elected Samson for that, he elected Samson for Samson's entire life and all that happened. Samson, from our limited human scope, was a muscles for brains, quick-tempered, lust-fueled, sinful man. And that at least appears to be true. But he was also faithful to God. He kept his Nazirite vow until he foolishly, frustratingly gave away the secret. We see a fallible human elected by God for his purposes, yet one who has free will and followed his nature as a sinful human at times, yet one who followed his sin nature as ordained by God for a sinless purpose, one to enact his judgment on a pagan people to bring himself glory. As for Delilah, she was a woman whom we know nothing about, except that God ordained her path to cross Samson's for such a time as this. See what I did there? For his plan and for his glory. The rest of her life, before and after, her exact thought process and motivation for what she did, I have no idea. They have no idea. God knows, because God ordained it, just as God ordained the rest of her life and his life and our lives for his glory. Delilah wasn't who this article presents her as. This, once again, is an attempt to create the strong female character that shows how loud women can roar. The story simply isn't that. The entire story of Samson, including the very brief intersection with Delilah, is yet another fascinating chunk of history in the life of Israel, and that's enough. We don't need to speculate any further than that for this to be a story we can give God all the glory for. And that's what we should do with this. Whatever more there is to this, well, for those of us who are saved, we can ask Samson at some point when we run across him in eternity. And maybe, hopefully, Delilah too. In our final segment, we'll delve into a, quote, rare biblical character. You can find out who next time as we hear them roar. Okay, so this book review should have been in the last episode, and the Heidelberg Catechism should have been in this episode. But because of a crucial error on, well, let's say on the part of someone who wishes to remain anonymous, folders were created, labels were confused, scripts were written, and Bob's your uncle, here we are. So I guess that means that this segment should be, well, definitely not a goals update, right? We all know I'm not ready for that. My schedule or math or whatever is all messed up here. Never mind. Let's just do a book review. We'll figure it out in the next episode. Danny's book review, installment number 8. Let's do this. So as of right now, I'm in the middle of, I guess, technically 5 books. One you'll know about very soon for reasons that I'll reveal soon, I guess. But as for right now, I've finished one book that I need to review, so let's do that, since we're all just here anyway. We got a classic this time, one that's been on my list or on my shelf for quite a while, mainly because as a Christian, we're all supposed to read this one, as well as a few others by the same author. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Okay, my review. Overall, see, I'd like to say that it was great. I can't. I'd like to say that it was good. I'm not willing to say that. I'd like to say that it was okay. I'll stop at that. We'll say it's okay. You'll see why. The book was apparently written from a series of radio talks that Lewis was requested to give as to what exactly Christianity was. Essentially, the transcripts of these broadcasts were first published as 3 different books over the years 1942, 43, and 44. It was then collected into one book entitled Mere Christianity, pretty much word for word from the broadcasts, and by the edition that I read, he had apparently cleaned up some of the language, following some of the literary standards that at least Lewis felt should be followed. So I was curious. I went to the Wikipedia entry for C.S. Lewis, only focusing on his Christianity. He was born in 1898, raised in a religious family, but at the age of 15, he decided there was no God and became an atheist. He said, among other things, that he viewed his religion as a chore and a duty. He also dabbled a little bit in the occult at that time. Following some discussions and arguments with his friend J.R.R. Tolkien, reading The Everlasting Man by G.K. Chesterton, never read that, and some personal wrestling and struggling, he says that he moved from atheism to theism in 1929, and from theism to Christianity in 1931. So, during his World War II religious radio broadcast that he was asked to give, he had been a Christian for about 10 years or so. Not a baby Christian by any stretch, but not really a seasoned and mature veteran of Christianity. I was curious about that based on what I read in this book. So, overall, I'd say for a new Christian, on the surface, this book appears to do a fair job of explaining stuff in a fairly understandable way, resulting in a working knowledge of Christianity. I don't think his point was to delve to the depths of theological wisdom, I don't know, for lack of a better term. Now, at the time he did these radio broadcasts, you'd have a lot of people listening that were, I would say, likely terrified. I didn't live through World War II. I mean, believe it or not, some people think I'm old enough, like my kid. But these people were likely terrified, many of whom were likely unsaved, and because of all the calamity around them, they were likely open to trying to figure out what is going on in this world. So he presents Christianity in very simplistic terms, in common speak. He moves in a logical progression, much the same way that Paul wrote the book of Romans. There's a statement in anticipation of, the big question or questions that are going to be asked based on what was just stated. Then he would answer the hypothetical question for the listener, or I guess now the reader. And from that perspective, he does a pretty good job. Now, I do have some issues that I noted down that I really think needs to be discussed here. First, he keeps using the term little Christs when referencing what Christians are or what Christians are attaining through sanctification. Now, I don't think, although I don't know this for sure, that he was implying that we, as humans, are being sanctified to the point of being miniature divine beings. Using that term today, well, that is what they mean by that. This term, little Christs, has been co-opted by the charismatic and some of the health, wealth, prosperity guys to mean that, say, for instance, just as cattle give birth to cattle kind, well, God made us as God kind. Not the same as God, but little Christs. That said, I don't want to attribute meaning behind something from 80 years ago based on how they use it today, But I do think that if anyone were to read this or recommend this book to a more immature Christian for basic knowledge, they should know or make known what exactly little Christs means, which is different from what it means in today's vernacular. At the very least, I'd recommend it was made very clear that little Christs should be probably better understood as sanctification to become more Christ-like. And that's regardless of how Lewis meant it. Next, he's a large proponent of free will, stating that free will is what made evil possible and that free will must exist, otherwise, why, God created robots. Now, that's the same argument I grew up with. It's kind of a tired argument, but that's the argument that a lot of us know. I maintain this is an incorrect argument. He takes it to the point that God is literally fighting for us to have free will. And that kind of seems like a silly proposition to me when you have an all-powerful God. If he wants us to have free will, well, okay. So my argument is it's not possible. Okay. God, because he's God, cannot grant his creation free will in the way that we like to understand it. Let me try to explain. If you and I meet up somewhere, I have absolute autonomous free will in relation to you, as in you have no idea what my next word or action will be until I say or do it. You can wargame in your mind what I might do. You can plan counterattacks, either verbal or physical, based on the various scenarios you've deemed possible, but you have no idea what the next frame of the film will reveal until that frame is displayed. And you, likewise, have the exact same free will over me. Neither you nor I are omnipotent, omniscient, sovereign God. Omniscience, as I understand it, means to know all, not to discover all. One argument is that God stands outside of time, which I would agree, so he can see everything that has, is, and will ever happen, at the exact same time, even. Therefore, he's omniscient, because he knows all. But that, again, implies that there was a moment in time when he didn't know all, because there was a moment in time when that timeline didn't exist. If there is ever a point in time where God didn't or doesn't know the next frame of the film until he's seen it, he's by definition not omniscient, and thus not God. Now, you could argue semantics, saying that creation, God's omniscience, etc., all happened at the exact same instant. Therefore, we have free will, he has omniscience. And to that, I'd argue that now you've severely limited his sovereignty in order to scoop some sovereignty up for yourself. And that's really the crux of the issue, to be honest. We humans don't want to think that there is a being, even God, who is all sovereign over our will, even if we've placed our hope, faith, and trust in that being being God, of course. Now, let me say this. You don't want to be sovereign. I don't want you to be sovereign, because this entire creation would be a smoking crater in milliseconds if you had even a dollop of God's sovereignty. The only way for God to be both omniscient and sovereign, as I understand those terms, is for us to not have free will in the way that we like to think of it. So think of it this way, an illustration that has helped me to accept this premise, because a lot of people don't like this premise. I get it. Proponents of the free will theory say that once saved, always saved, right? Right. Why? Well, because once we're saved, we know that we are safe in the hand of Jesus, which is surrounded by the hand of God the Father, and no man, which includes our own selves, can pluck ourselves out of his hand. Okay, that's scripture. But why not? What if I was safe in his hand, but I decided I wanted out? I didn't just want to sow my wild oats. I didn't want to simply go all prodigal son. I wanted out. If God doesn't let us out of the contract, isn't that removing our free will? But the Free Willians say that once you're saved, you won't want to get out. Really? We'll tell that to the Muslims. They believe in a salvation. Might be wrong, right? They're wrong. But they believe in a salvation. And they also believe that they can be saved of sorts, that Allah will have the final say, yes, but they do their part, so they're saved. But they also believe that they can unsave themselves if, say, they'd like to go visit a prostitute. And then when that's done, they can resave themselves and all's good. That is literally free will. That's literally what those who argue free will should be arguing that they could do. In fact, there are a few Protestant denominations who do believe you can lose your salvation. They're logically following the premise of free will. They're biblically wrong, but they're logically correct. Now, for the majority of Protestant Christianity, they say that free will is absolutely a thing, which means that salvation is a cooperative thing between God and you, and that God can plead and beg. In fact, he can demand, and you can cross your arms, stick out your lower lip, and say no. And God is powerless to do anything about it, because you have free will. That makes you sovereign over God. Not sure you want to take that stance, to be honest. But if they're smart enough, if they're entitled enough, then they'll capitulate to God's pleading, and then they're once saved, always saved. Most of the free williards will then kick the free will door closed behind them, being more than willing to remove free will once they've safely got their hand on the goal. Think back to your days of playing tag. All this really does is give the free Willonians the pride, because that's really what it is, of having been enlightened enough to choose Jesus, while allowing for the argument of God's sovereignty on the backside. It's having your cake and eating it too, which is honestly the absolute best thing to do with cake, not the best thing to do with God's sovereignty. Okay, look, we need to move on from this topic. I know I was speaking in jest with naming those who believe the free will theological theory. I am well aware that they like to be called the free Wilhelminas. Now, all that said, here comes the paradox. If you draw your boundaries around the human realm, as I already showed, we have free will. We act according to the inclination of our heart. We do what we want to do. But from an ultimate standpoint, we don't, because we can't, or else God can't be God. If God even gives us a skosh of his godness, or gives a skosh of his godness to someone or something else, well, then God is no longer God. As R.C. Sproul often said, if there was one maverick molecule in this universe not under God's complete and total sovereignty, that one molecule could be the one that would completely destroy God's plan of redemption of his elect. That's theologically accurate, and it's logical, regardless of how people feel about that statement. Now, how does all this work? I don't know. But I also don't understand the Trinity. And there's a number of things that I don't understand that are paradoxical, but they work because that's how God has ordained it to work. So, moving on. Lewis went to lengths in a few sections defending free will. Now, you may take no issue with this. I kind of think you should. All right. Lastly on my list is the topic of evolution versus creation. Lewis appears to be, at least some degree, and I don't know how much, a believer in Darwinian evolution. At one point, and I'm sorry I didn't make note of this one, he alluded to what we call dinosaurs today as being on Earth millions, millennia, I forget exactly how he stated it, a lot of years prior to man, let's just say that. That's fine to believe if you want, I guess, but it's not biblical. In fact, it's counter to what we're clearly told in Genesis and counter to what God himself speaks of to Job, for instance. In another spot, and I did note this one down, he stated this, quote, "We were once rather like vegetables and once rather like fish. It was only at a later stage that we became like human babies. And if we had been conscious at those earlier stages, I dare say we should have been quite contented to stay as vegetables or fish, should not have wanted to be made into babies. But all the time he knew his plan for us and was determined to carry it out. Something the same is now happening at a higher level." Okay. First of all, this clearly disputes his theory of free will, just saying. I won't go back there. More so, what he's talking about is the debunked pseudoscientific theory of ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which is super fun to say, but scientific quackery and damning heresy, to be honest. This is the theory that found its origins with Darwin, but it was made most prominent with fetal drawings done by Ernst Haeckel, a German scientist in the mid-1800s. The term ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny simply means that development from the most primitive to the most developed state copies the evolutionary chain. So, Haeckel and others claimed that just as evolution went from single cell to vegetation to fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal to human, basically, that's what all fetuses of all creatures do during their development. They start as an egg and a sperm, then they move through all of those different stages, stopping at their final form, whatever that is. For humans, it's a tiny baby human. Haeckel most famously produced what he claimed were scientifically accurate drawings of various creatures, showing how the fetal development of these very different creatures were all remarkably similar at the different stages. These drawings can still be found in some textbooks today, regardless of the fact that they were debunked within 10 to 15 years of him publishing his drawings and claims. Today, we know, through various imaging techniques, that this was a lie. And it was a lie. He knew he was pushing his agenda and pushing the evolution theory rather than publishing scientific fact. Lewis did his radio broadcasts in the early 1940s. Darwinian evolution theory had been around and discussed and debated and debunked for about 80 years by that time. The Haeckel drawings had been around for about 70 years and had been debunked for at least 60 years by that time. But this is exactly what Lewis subscribed to, at least in this book. He's wrong. Scientifically, he was wrong then, and he's wrong now. Biblically, the entire theory of evolution is counter to what we're clearly told in the Bible, and Lewis, being a smart, well-read, scholarly man, had to know of the debate and the biblical stance on both evolution and the Haeckel drawings at the time of his giving these addresses on the radio. But it appears that throughout the book, he wasn't so much worried about theological precision. He was more interested in the concept of Christianity, focused more on, I'd say, faith in Christ as its own concept. In fact, and I missed this, but just this past Sunday in Sunday school, someone mentioned that in this book, Lewis treats the atonement of Christ as somewhat trivial. Well, I looked this up, and I'm not going to spend any time on it here, but it appears that he treats this topic with the same kind of dismissiveness as the others. Kind of, well, here's what I think, here's why I think it. If it doesn't work for you, hey, that's okay. It's not of the utmost importance. But your theology is important. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't think there's any way that any of us can have a perfect theology, but we should not treat it with any flippancy. And I guess I'm not saying that Lewis treats this topic of Christianity as a buffet or with insincerity. I just think his personal theology, at least in the writing of this book, was shallow. I know, to Protestant Christians, that's heresy. I get it. Well, look, I don't like John Piper either. There, now you can really hate me. So the title, Mere Christianity, it kind of sums up what this book seemed like to me. It's a book that looks at Christianity without the theological depth it really needs. Now, I've heard that this is a good primer, like I said, for new Christians, giving them a little bit on a lot of topics in an understandable way. Look, I think just reading this book alone, Lewis seems like he would have been both an interesting and a fun person to spend time with. He stated that during his lifetime that he was not a theologian. Although, I mean, he kind of played one. He's definitely been overly elevated to one today. I would not doubt his profession of salvation. We're not talking Andy Stanley levels of heresy, blasphemy, and apostasy here. But would I recommend this book? Well, not really, to be honest. To the mature Christian, this really doesn't add much of anything. And beside my smiling at some of the 80-year-old British quips and Lewis's dry British humor, it was more frustrating to me as I found that I had to read it with my guard up because there were too many things that were, well, they were just kind of off, if not just blatantly wrong. My trigger point was early on in the book regarding evolution. That's what notched my discernment shields up to sound like the science fiction nerd that I am. At the same time, I definitely wouldn't recommend it for a new or immature Christian. I just wouldn't. There's enough theological and scientific error in here, along with some other parts of really squishy theology, or the permission to dismiss parts of theology that you don't like, that I think it would probably do more harm than good. Now, I know that to probably more than a few, I've attacked one of the good ones, right? And I'm sorry. To be honest, this is the first non-Narnian C.S. Lewis book I've read. I still do want to read some of the others, but I know that I'll be reading them in a more discerning, cautionary way right from the beginning, based on what I read in this one. Okay, look, if there are still any listeners tuning in, if there's still anybody still subscribed, I guess that'll do it for Danny's book review installment number 8. I have put a link to the book in the notes as always, and it appears you can get it free online in PDF form, probably other forms as well. I've put one such PDF link in the notes as well. Just be aware of what you're reading on this one if you decide to read it. So with that, as always, go read something. And with that, sadly, we've reached the end of yet another episode of the Logical Christian Podcast. I feel we've bonded as we've laughed and cried and twisted our faces in incredulity. If you've enjoyed or found value in what you've heard, go on and do all the podcast things. And don't forget to check the show notes for links and contact info. Lawrence J. Peters said, "Against logic there is no armor like ignorance." Jesus told us that if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So stay in the word, stay logical, stay faithful, and until next time, God bless.